Thank you so much, Shruti, for coming on the show. And I have heard a lot of things about you from Deepak and others. And actually, I think I have used Wingman few times when I was at Slintel to hear back how the sales team are interacting with the customers, right? Because we were using Wingman as well while scaling up, right? So seeing the product, using the product, and then meeting the founder is another feeling, right? So thank you so much again for coming on the show and giving us time. Basically, before we get started, right, would love to know like uh, your journey about like how did you get started with Wingman, right, and what inspired you to basically solve the problem that you guys were solving at Wingman, which was like conversational intelligence, right? What were the majorly like covering some challenges that you faced, and how did you tackle them, right? Your brief journey of sort.
Sure. Firstly, thanks for having me, Ashutosh. And yeah, it's always great to meet somebody who's, used the product first and product has been the face before you were the face. As a startup founder, that's, both exciting and sometimes unnerving. So I had a long journey in the corporate world before I started to do my before, and so there is always lots of things that you thought could be better in the world, and then things that you thought that you might want to make better in the world, and then there has to be point where the two meet. And you feel compulsive enough to say that no, you know what, this is what I'm going to hang my hat on and like try to change something about how this is done. So for me, just before I started Wingman, I was working at a fintech startup. I call it a startup, though I guess it was at that point a Series E company. But in the Indian context, they were very much a startup. We were just three people. We didn't know what the go-to-market should be, but we didn't even know like who were we selling to, what was the product, what was the pricing. Everything was in the 0 to 1 phase. So I was at Payoneer, and it's in the cross-border B2B payments ecosystem.
Nice.
So through that journey, what I realized was that, as you're trying to do that 0 to 1, there is a lot of value in listening to your customers, what they're telling you about what their problems are, understanding what their hesitations are to switching to another product. Or, in the case of finance, there's also usually a lot of stuff around regulatory drawbacks and hurdles. In our case, because of the way the company was set up, right? Like we were in India, we were trying to do the go to market, but there was, of course, a product and marketing team that was centralized and that was based in Israel. So, there was so much context that would get lost between what the customer said and what our teams would really prioritize or even understand why the customer was saying what they were saying. So that was what initially sparked the idea in my mind, which was to say, you know what, every time something happens, the product team or the marketing team will be like, hey, can you organize a customer interview or can you organize another call with the prospect? And I'm like, listen, that person is not even sure that they want to buy the product. The last thing they want to do is spend like another 30 minutes giving you feedback on something. Try imagine coordinating that across time zones, and then half the time the customer won't show up and like something else will happen. So it's the last thing that salespeople want to prioritize because they know like it's not really going to get them very far. So I think in that context, I was like, it will be great if I could record these customer conversations and then I could share them back with product. And then over a period of time, when product is launching new features, they often want to know like, hey, now that we are launching this, why don't you reach out to all the customers who had previously asked for it? And you're like, I don't have a list like that, right? So, yeah, so those are some of the things that initially got us to say like, hey, there is a ton of value in customer conversations. They don't get recorded, and even in cases where they were getting recorded over a phone or something, really useful because nobody's going to listen to like 100 calls and say, you know what, these are the three people who asked for this feature. So that's kind of where we said, okay, you know what, if we could record calls and meetings and we could then put intelligence on top of it. So firstly, could we transcribe it? Could we put the ability to search on it and all of that? So that's how our journey started with Wingman.
Thank you so much. And you started quite a while back. At that moment of time, Gen AI was not a thing, but you were building an intelligence layer on top of it, right? Like if you were building Wingman today, how do you imagine it would have been like changed? And if there had been a Wingman today?
Yeah, so of course, conversational intelligence has really taken off since that time in 2017. I think two things have changed, and one you mentioned is the Gen AI part, right? But there's like a bunch of things in the technology layer that have changed, and I can talk about it. But the other thing that has also changed is human behavior, right, in this period of time. And when I say human behavior, the biggest thing that has changed really is the fact that people have gotten comfortable with their meetings getting recorded, right? Like
Yeah.
80% of the times when we spoke to people back in 2017, 2018, the first thing they would ask was not even like, will the technology work? How will you record a call? They would be like, you must be crazy that you think my salesperson will let you record this call. And
Hmm.
even if my salesperson lets you record this call, the customer won't be okay with it. Right. So that's kind of the one big thing from a behavior standpoint that has really changed. And fortunately, unfortunately, a lot of that has actually happened because of COVID, right? Because people had to work remotely and then people got comfortable with saying, can I use technology to replace the day to day interactions? From a technology standpoint, there were many fundamental building blocks, and maybe I would just layer it into three big pieces, right? So one was the ability to even record a video meeting. Right. So that didn't exist in the way and form that it exists today. It was a lot of a hacky approach to say, will I dial into a call as a bot? Will I join the call as a bot? Every time the interface changes with Zoom or Google Meets, will my bot, fail to join the call and stuff like that, right? Today, some of those have become APIs. Today, some of those have become services that somebody else is managing and you can just plug into it, right? So if I was building it today, I could probably, not have to answer a lot of the tech questions that we had to answer just even in the recording layer. The second layer really, in our case, is the transcription layer, which is taking the voice and converting it into text. At that point, Alexa and Google Home, etc., existed. The quality of transcription was still quite bad and it was still very expensive, right? And what you would do is you would basically use an API to send this across to a Google or a IBM Watson or whatever be it, and then get the transcript back. It was not very reliable, right? So you would get maybe a 70-75% accuracy. Today, you don't need to be doing that because OpenAI launched open source models that you can actually just run on your own servers, which are already way better than what existed with the expensive technology 4 or 5 years back.
Right.
And so I would say that both in terms of accuracy and in terms of cost, part of the layer has completely changed. So the cost has crashed tremendously, right? Business models that were not even feasible. There were applications of transcription that from a financial standpoint did not make sense, which today, make sense because transcription cost has come down. And then the third layer is the intelligence layer, right? So back then we were using NLP, we were developing our own NLP models. So it was a combination of saying, you know what, I'll train the data on saying, hey, these are examples of what a pricing discussion could be, right? I would say, yes, this is a pricing discussion. Yes, this is a pricing discussion. I would use that data to train the model so that the next time it was going through a call, it would say, oh, I think this part is a pricing discussion. Today, you don't need to do that, right? So with Gen AI, you are able to automatically figure out topics that are not based on keywords, that are smart topics, because it kind of understands the conversation in that sense. And similarly, other layer of intelligence is understanding the emotions and the sentiments around it. And that again is something that Gen AI can do much better than what was possible. And it's been really exciting for us to see how the technology has evolved because we've been so close to it. So, we've literally been benchmarking these things, right? Like back then, we were benchmarking the transcription accuracy across all the big transcription providers. We were using IBM Watson to say, what is the sentiment analysis accuracy, and those numbers used to look dismal, right? So like, your transcription accuracy was in the 70 percentage points. Sentiment analysis accuracy in a sales context was, barely at a 55%. So it wasn't really very usable, but today those numbers have changed phenomenally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we already know, and for the audience, like Wingman was acquired by Clari, right? It was a good outcome for you. Like, how did the acquisition by Clari impacted Wingman's mission per se, right? Because you were onto something, you were thinking to build, as you were sharing, right? There were problems that customers wanted, you wanted to solve for the customers and for the teams that are actually looking to understand and get intelligence out of customer calls, right? So how did it impacted your mission at Wingman, and like what new opportunities you saw? Okay, if I join hands with Clary, would actually give me a way ahead, or like give me a bridge of sort to basically get there. So, and how did you decide? Because for founders to actually think about getting into a deal, I think it is a lot. You have been through that, right? So I cannot imagine like how difficult or easy it is. Just wanted to know your thought process there.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I started my career as an investment banker back in 2008. So, I have a little bit more context than a lot of other people do in terms of how, what really goes down when there is a merger and acquisition happening. But I would say that, with the Wingman journey, it was a little bit like we had a hammer and we were looking for what nails to,
Hmm.
hammer with it.
Hmm.
And by that, what I mean is like we kind of we understood that there were many things that this technology could do, right? Because ultimately, if you really boil it down, right, it's looking at a new type of data, right?
Hmm.
Because the sales call data did not exist in the universe in that manner. And now that I have created this type of data, the question is like, hey, I could use this for developing my product strategy. I could use this for training my sales reps. I could use this for figuring out what my deal risks are. I could use this for figuring out what how marketing attribution could be done better. I could so
Right.
there are like at least 7 8 different ways in very broad headings that you could use this data, right? So
Yes.
in that sense, that was the hammer, right? And as we started looking at different nails that we could hammer with this, what emerged for us was that some of those were far removed from the user or the buyer, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, product being able to figure out product roadmap, a sales VP is not going to pay for that, right? They're like,
Hmm.
if that's what you're going to give me, then you go and ask the product guy to pay for this.
Yeah.
So some of those nails did not fit into that value to the buyer.
Hmm.
The other set of problems was that either those problems were not top of mind or they were a little bit more futuristic, right? So, and the reason why I'm saying this is to just get to the Clary's part of the story. Over a period of time, as we were going through our own journey as Wingman, we were trying to figure out the most attractive nail that this hammer was suitable for the
Hmm.
today and now, right? And
Hmm.
what we realized was that that value that people could see was really when it came to looking at risks and coaching opportunities and analysis from a
Hmm.
deal perspective, right? It wasn't if I said product feature perspective or if I said, hey, I will tell you which sales rep is not doing well and why they are not doing well. Those were all very different dimensions that were all useful, but those were not the most immediate kind of ROI paths.
Generating. Absolutely. Actually, I was about to ask you because your buyer was, let's say, a VP of sales or a sales director or a founder, right? But you started your journey to basically, as you were saying, that how
Right.
a product team can understand what to build next, what to do next. So in your journey while you were building that, you were able to understand where you need to basically hammer it, right? And how a founder should also look at it from your perspective, because you have solved your PMF problem, your GTM problem, right? So founder like me who is now basically building, and there are a lot of incoming customers from left, right, center, right? People say, okay, if you are building an horizontal, try to go with industry sector perspective and then probably go wider. Was there thinking from that angle as well, and from persona angle while you were building?
Yeah. So I think very quickly from the persona standpoint, one thing we realized is that if you need to drive any type of behavior change,
Hmm.
you better be aligning yourself to the person in the organization who can drive that behavior change. All right.
Hmm.
So what I mean is if I need sales reps to record their calls, right?
Makes sense.
Forget about who's paying for it. The product manager can't even tell a sales rep to record their calls, right?
Hmm.
It's only the VP of sales who can come in and say, listen, you have to record your calls, and everybody will do it. Right.
Hmm.
So you have to think about the fact that every product requires some sort of a adoption curve and challenge, right? And you
Right.
also have to align yourself to the person who can drive that, right?
Hmm.
The second thing really is you have to begin to think about what moves the needle for that person, right? So in our case, if I give you the example of saying, like, I could have very well, and in fact, this is what we heard from many sales leaders when we said, hey, if I give you all these call recordings, how would you use it, right? They would all say that, I would use this to coach my sales reps. And what they would say is that, hey, my best performing rep does X, and then, my performing rep maybe only does 20% of X. So I know that there is a big gap, and I know that if I can get everybody to use the best practices, everybody will be happier. I will hit my quota better. It seemed like that should work, right? But the challenge there is that it's not a measurable KPI, right? When I say it is not a measurable KPI, I'm not referring to the quota attainment. I am referring to the coaching part of it,
Coaching part, yes, because
right?
it can't be measured, right? So how
Yeah.
can you measure it, right?
And the fact is that it's not in the sales VP of sales world, it's not even something that is written down and said like, hey, you have to coach every rep, once a week, otherwise you'll get fired, right?
Hmm.
It is written in every sales VP's contract to say that if you don't hit your quota, I can fire you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you begin to realize that the pecking order in their own priority is not going to be very high for coaching, but it's going to be very high when it comes to looking at deal risk and pipeline analysis and
Right. Also,
revenue
yeah,
forecasting.
yeah.
And
Makes
that's
sense.
kind of what brings me back to the Clary story. So over a period of time, we had already come to the conclusion that what we needed to align ourselves to was deal risk analysis, overall helping them manage the pipeline, and then somewhere that all feeds into doing better, more predictable, more accurate revenue forecasting. Right.
Hmm.
So, and that is kind of what Clary was doing. They were coming at this problem from the revenue forecasting standpoint. Right. So
Right.
they were saying that I'm using a bunch of different signals to get to a better revenue forecast. One signal that is missing for us is the conversation intelligence piece. And so if we bring these two together, I can, deliver on this promise much better.
Hmm.
So through that journey of M&A, and when we decided to say that, okay, what, this is an interesting opportunity, we wanted to make sure that we were aligning ourselves to an acquirer who would get the most value out of the product as well.
Right. Right.
And that would mean that, of course, the product would do well, the customers, existing customers would benefit, but also that aligned with our long-term vision of the value that we were creating. So, there were different types of options on the table for us at that point. And we chose Clary because all of these things were perfect,
Hmm.
fit in that case.
Right. I think one point that you mentioned, and which is a hard problem, from my perspective, that I see is, even though like VP of sales told you that we will use Wingman for coaching, saying no to that is a harder bit, right? Because everybody said, okay, we will be using Wingman for coaching. You said no. That is not the way how we are going to build the product, right? Saying that, okay, deal pricing and other things are going to like show us we'll be able to show the ROI of the product. That is a harder part for a founder, and I think that is where it made difference, I would say. So how did you
Yeah.
like decided, okay, saying no to coaching is something that, didn't you had a fight between your co-founder and all?
So I think it's a very important point that you highlighted, Ashutosh. And I think in terms of what is the repeatable advice from this, right? It's two things. When you are trying to build a business and when you're trying to figure out both how do you want to, get the product to deliver value, right? You have to think deeply about what is that value. Now, there are two ways that people go about doing this, right? So, yes, you will do a whole value prop canvas exercise, right? You can start with looking at what are the different jobs this person needs to do, etc. What that misses out on is that you get a laundry list of jobs and you don't know what is the pecking order of those jobs,
Hmm.
right? So one is figuring out the pecking order of the jobs and ideally figuring that out based on the KPIs for that particular persona, right? So one, it's very important to know the right persona,
Hmm.
because if I had chosen my persona as sales enablement instead of VP of sales, the job hierarchy for a sales enablement person is very different from the job hierarchy for the VP of sales, right? So
Hmm.
then, which one do I prioritize becomes different. And oftentimes people don't spend enough time and energy in saying I have to pick one persona, because they say, you know what, I can pitch to this and this and this. But
Absolutely.
if you don't know which is your primary persona, you are going to be doing all the things in this muddle of like, I could be doing A and B and C, and you will not be able to build A or B or C correctly. The second part of it is that once you identify the persona, you have to figure out what will get them promoted and what will get them fired,
Hmm.
right? And
And
see how.
what do you mean by like get them promoted and as in the persona that you were talking about? So the
Yeah,
VP of sales, whether like he'll be getting promoted, okay, their personal agenda should also be mentioned, right? Got
yeah,
it. Got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore, which of these jobs are the most important for them,
Hmm.
right? So, like I said, I have not heard of a single VP of sales getting fired for not coaching their sales reps, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So then you know that, while uh, in my mind that might seem like a big priority, I also
Hmm.
know that if on my calendar there are five other things and one thing needs to be knocked off, I know which one that is going to be, right?
Makes sense.
The first thing that's going to get knocked off is the one thing that's not going to get me fired, right? And then the third thing is to look at how do they currently spend their time,
Hmm.
right? If you, I don't think people do this seriously enough, which is an exercise of saying day in the life of or your persona, right?
Okay.
And you literally try to look at this at the weekly level to say, you know what are the things that they are doing and they are spending time on? And you do that for two reasons. One is you're trying to figure out which of these existing activities do I align myself to, right? If they have
Hmm.
this type of a meeting or if they are spending time doing this, I can tell them exactly this is when you should use my product, right?
Okay. Got it.
Because it's a bit like habit stacking, right? If I
Hmm.
need to tell you that you need to floss, I should also tell you that the best time for you to do that is right after you finish brushing, right? Otherwise
Right.
it will be like, yeah, you can be flossing any time of the day, but then it never happens,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you
Absolutely.
need to identify the right kind of habit stacking that you can help your persona do, right?
Hmm.
The second thing is once you look at their calendar and you realize that there are things that they're spending more time on and there are things that they're not spending enough time on, you also know what is the priority in their mind.
Makes
If I look at their calendar and I see that on a weekly cadence there are actually no coaching calls, but I know that on a weekly cadence there's a pipeline review meeting, then
sense.
I know that if I align myself to a pipeline review meeting and I know that it never gets cancelled, right? I know that my product
This
will get used and that the value that I deliver is going to be important to them.
makes sense. I think this is a very good lens or very good way to basically identify where actually your product is getting used, and even to think from the perspective of that, okay, how important a role it is going to play while that time period, right? I think yeah, it's a very good lens to look at. Thank you so much, Shruti, for that. You want to finish your thought there?
I think, I mean, just one thing that as a founder, if you're kind of starting on this journey, right, like just make sure that you don't go down the path of saying, you know what, since I haven't figured this out, let me keep all my doors open, right? You should constantly be forcing yourself into an answer, right? So
Hmm.
even if today you don't have conviction on your answer, you should at least have a hypothesis for your answer and a set of criteria and a method to test that hypothesis. Because otherwise, you can extend that timeline, right? You can say, you know what, I'll do 30 interviews with my persona 1, 30 with my persona 2, 30 with my persona 3. And then, if you don't know what you're going to ask clearly in those questions and why you are doing those questions, firstly, it'll take you very long time to actually do those 90 interviews. And then by the time you finish them, the signals won't be very clear in your head because you were not looking for a particular answer. So you didn't get a very clear answer. Right. And it's important to therefore be very, very clear that that is part of the journey. Is an answer. Right. And there is a value to understanding that, oh, this persona doesn't work or this job doesn't work for me. And to
But
kind of
don't you
not
think
ignore that signal.
sorry to cut you there, Shruti, but don't you think like it might be you yourself like feeding confirmation bias, right? It might come as a confirmation bias. Okay, so like uh, I think that this is an important problem to solve, but I am feeding myself the same story again and again. It might come as a confirmation bias.
Exactly, which is why you need to put the filter of saying, tell me exactly how much time do you spend on this? Can you show me your calendar? All right. And to intuitively and by looking at job descriptions and by understanding how people get promoted and how they get fired, you are going to make sure that your biases are somewhat reduced, right? So which is why it's important to think about the right questions to ask, because otherwise it's very easy, right? Like if I did these interviews saying, hey, is coaching important to you? They'll be like, yeah, it's very important. And then I'll be like, oh, so how, why do you think it's important? And they'll be able to tell me like for the next 5 minutes why it's important, right?
Hmm.
But it still doesn't answer the question of when does it happen and how important is it? And what happens if it doesn't happen?
Hmm. Makes sense. No, no, I think you've rightly answered. Advancing on to the next question. So, like, you started 2017 and then got acquired by Clari. Now we are seeing a lot of AI, Gen AI tools coming in, and the landscape is changing a lot, right? The sales tech is changing a lot. There are enterprises companies, big enterprises companies in sales tech. We are seeing there are new trends coming in, right? So with the new trends coming in with AI, how do you think that new AI stack will play a role? And what are the most exciting tools that you think will come out from there, right? Have you started seeing some trends and on which like you are constantly monitoring to start, let's say, the next journey of yours, or like anything on that?
I think this is one of the tough stages in that evolution, right? Every once in a while, we go from things which are a continuum to a step change, and I think right now we are in a step change. So it's very hard to predict what world looks like on the other side of that step.
Yeah.
I would say in the last maybe 10 years, we were kind of at a continuum. So you could
Mhm.
somewhat take a linear approach to saying, what if things look like this today? If I 10x this, then this is what things will look like 3 years
Right,
later.
right, absolutely.
So I think right now it's probably a tough time to make predictions confidently. But having said that, I feel people have to think of technology in a few different ways, right? And people also have to learn to have some sort of patience with it,
Mm,
because what we are going to see is that technology is probably going to under deliver in the next 2 years, but
mm,
over deliver in the next 10 years, right? When it comes to the new age of Gen AI type technologies. And
mm,
so in the next 2 years, we will see a lot of over promise and under delivery, right? Because everybody is excited, everybody is going at it and saying, what, I'm going to make an autopilot for this, and I'm going to replace a human being to do this. And some of that is going to happen, right?
yeah.
But people also need to temper their expectations.
Mm,
So even when, like even in our case, when we decided to talk about Wingman people, what they would say is, what? Firstly, either they will be like completely skeptical about the behavior part of it, right? Once they say, okay, what? Even if the behavior, people start adopting this, then they will be like, oh, but when I talk to my Alexa, it doesn't understand me half the time. Right. So
mm,
I'm assuming you're using a similar transcription technology, which means you will get the transcript wrong half the time. And then they will say, on top of that, if you're going to use NLP, that is also going to have a maybe 70% accuracy rate.
mm,
Then, 70% times 70%, you're going to get to a 49%, which is like less than half the things you will get right. Right. Which is true, right? In the short term, if you're coming in with the expectation that I'm not getting 100%, I'm only getting 49%,
mm,
you're going to be disappointed, right? But if you come in saying that, hey, listen, I'm at 0%, even if you take me to 49%, that is a lot better than where I am today, then
mm.
it's a different conversation, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that when technology comes in, there is a lot of hype and everybody looks at it at what it should do at the 100% level. But of course, it's not going to deliver at the 100% level on day one, right? It's like you going to, I don't know, like going to a swimming pool and saying, like, listen, I can't swim after 3 classes, and therefore, the classes are all useless. But of course, if you did the classes for another 1 year, you will be able to swim. So I think that's kind of where we are with the technology. And so it's a bit of people tempering their expectations on what it can deliver. a bit of technology building towards the future, but also delivering something in the short term.
Hmm.
So I mean, I don't want to make specific predictions on, SDR roles will go away, or like, this is what's going to happen or not happen. But I feel like there is this balance that people need to, and therefore, and I think the other thing that as a user you need to understand is you can't ignore this technology, right? Even if it's working at 49%, you have to understand that everybody else who's using it is going to be that much better than you, right? So if you choose to be on the sidelines and say, you know what, I will use it when it hits 100%, you're going to be left behind.
Amazing. I think this is a very good lens that you gave me actually. That, okay, for 2 years here, I think people are going to say a lot of things, but it will kind of under deliver whatever they are saying, right? But it will outperform for sure after 2 years of sort, right? And being cognizant about the outcome is also one of the things I think from user lens is that. So from founder lens I can see, okay, we should not like overcommit a lot, right? Because if we are overcommitting, then probably there would be a lot of churn that we will see, a lot of bad mouth of product will happen, right? So from that perspective, but from the lens perspective of like a user, if I'm a founder also using some tool which is having gen AI of sort, I should be like patient in terms of like how it will perform in future and how it can be useful. I think this is a very good lens. Thank you so much about it is very useful. I'll tell my product manager to actually calm down there. And one more thing, I think you said like there are like short term goals that you should also focus on, as in like there is 100% that you want to reach, but it should be milestone driven, right? Okay, I want to reach first here, then here, then here, then here. I think that is a very good approach. So
I think the other thing to layer on that is really to also think about what in my universe is more kind of resistant to mistakes, right? So there are going to be applications that are more sensitive to things going wrong, and there are things that are more resistant to things going wrong. The other way to put it is that there are going to be things that are very hard to solve, right?
hmm,
And there are going to be things that are easier to solve and show some value with, right? So
hmm,
like in our case, if I say, 5 years back, if I started with saying that, listen, the thing that is really going to deliver a lot of value is good sentiment analysis, right?
hmm,
That was a very hard problem to solve, right? Like IBM Watson was only giving you 55% or whatever. Like, what will you do with it, right?
hmm,
And you can say that, what, for the next 5 years, I'm going to just keep trying to make this model better. Doesn't matter because this is the only problem that I care about solving, right? And it's all something that is, one, hard to solve, but secondly also maybe somewhat more sensitive to the application is sensitive to people being afraid of it going wrong. So
hmm,
it's like if you tell me that, hey, this person is very happy and in the end it is not, right, then maybe the impact of that on my function is very large. But there are
hmm.
certain areas in which, even if something goes wrong, there is some sort of a tolerance to things going wrong, right? So
Makes sense.
you have
Yep.
to pick and choose your application areas in that way, right? So suppose I was creating a AI company for doing presentations, right?
Hmm, hmm,
I would not go and start with the problem of doing presentations to investors, right? Because the
hmm,
tolerance for that is very low, right? If you make a presentation that is not very good, then the stakes are very high, right?
hmm, hmm,
On the other side, it is also a problem that is hard to solve technologically because there's not going to be like you don't already have 100 presentations for your business that you've done to investors. Not a lot of data. There's a lot of customization, blah blah. So if you choose as a presentations AI company that that is the one thing that you want to solve, then that's not a very smart choice, in my opinion. Right?
hmm.
Instead, you would choose an application where you're still building AI for making presentations, but where the tolerance is higher and where the ability to get to that outcome is easier. Right?
And there's a large data set as well, right? Because
Yeah.
in VC calls, you'll be having like 10 or like 100 max or 200 max, right? So I think you rightly said, so small fights and small milestone driven approach, that could be an easier win for me. Actually I
Don't
can
go for glory, basically.
actually I can like totally resonate on that. Like for us, what we are trying to build is Revrag, where like we are building an AI agent for sales, right? Getting demos, but getting to demos is actually the glory that you are talking about, right? But there are small fights as well, getting to the right customer bit, getting the high intent properly, right? Writing good emails of sort, uh, writing better emails than any human, let's say, doing better research of sort. I think these are the small fights probably will be able to and will be able to complete in a shorter while than small pieces together can basically make it a bigger glory. No, totally resonate there. One more question that I have is like, so Wingman empowered sales reps with real time coaching, right? And so how do you envision AI enhancing kind of like productivity further and help them scale this bit of sort, right? Because you have been in this conversational AI bit, and where do you see it going with now the Gen AI is actually, you have almost like, now that you have, I think, left Clary, what do you think like the next step would be for conversational intelligence with the AI getting added on a layer?
Yeah, so the funny thing with conversation intelligence was that from day one, right, it was almost that we already had like a laundry list of product features and like a roadmap and a vision. All of that made sense from a user perspective, and what was really missing was the technology to support that. Right? It was
Mhm.
one of those areas where the pull is strongest for what Gen AI can deliver. Right? And think about it. The reason for that is like at the end of the day, this is all based on large language models, the ability to understand language. And sales conversations are exactly that, right? It's just a lot of language, and people are trying to make sense of that unstructured data into a structured format. So, literally, even before I started the company, I could have listed down like 25 things that people would want from this, right? I want you to summarize my calls. I want you to tell me what my action items from this call are. I want you to be able to go and update my CRM because sales reps don't update my CRM. I want you to be able to give me better competitor analysis. I want you to be able to give me better loss analysis. I want you to be able to tell me people doing rapport building. I want you to tell me are people offering too many discounts, right? Like there's a bunch of questions that people have in their mind, and it was just not possible to answer those because the technology wasn't there. With Gen literally overnight, a lot of these things have become possible, right? So, like today, you wouldn't buy a conversation intelligence tool that wouldn't give you a good summary or that
Hmm.
wouldn't give you a list of to dos,
I think this has commoditized a bit there,
right?
right?
But 2 years back, this was just not possible, right? Because the technology didn't exist to do it. So, I would say that this is one area where, while the application seems so revolutionary as a user, but having been on the inside, it's literally like, oh, you know what? I already had this set of product requirements from all my customers. It's just that I wasn't able to deliver on it, and now I can. So, I mean, I think that that pull has been very strong. I think in the long term, what will we see with this? I think it's you have to really think of what are the flows through which people want to access this information, right? So in the existing world, if I'm doing a B2B sale, assume that it's not a very commoditized sale. If it's maybe $100,000 plus ticket size, there is still going to be a sales process, I believe, at least in the next 5 years. And during this period of time, the questions that people will ask for those deals will still be very similar to what we ask today, right? Like, hey, did you already discuss, ABC? If I'm using a methodology, then, if say I'm using MedPick, then I'll be like, hey, do you know the decision maker? Do you know what the paper process is? Blah, blah. So I think it's just that a lot of those systems which used to be manual, which used to be happen over conversations, can now happen through the data. And then once you assume that those can happen through the data, then what is the next layer, right? Then you begin to start looking for patterns between this data. So you say, you know what, if the decision maker is X, then this becomes a problem. Or if I don't know the decision maker, by, within the first month of my sales process, then, usually my sales fall apart, right? So you then try to say, okay, what happens with the trends of the data, and how can I use the trends of the data? And then once you have the trends of the data, right, that is still at the insight level, then you basically begin to say, what actions can I automate on top of the trends?
Hmm.
Right. So that's kind of where I feel like at a very high level this will evolve. But at each of these layers, and you could put any lens to it, right? Somebody might say that, hey, the coaching application, which I just dished this a while back, saying that, VP of sales don't care for it. Of course, they care for it. It's just not, one of the top three priorities. It might still be the fifth priority. If I put that lens on it and say, what can conversational intelligence do for it? People are already able to actually type in to their call summary and say, what, I'm Ashutosh. Can you tell me what are the three things I could have done better in this call? And the AI is able to tell them that.
Makes sense. Yep. Yep.
Right. So that coaching piece, and that is at the very modular level. Again, you can take the same thing of saying, there is data, then there is trends in data or insights, and then there is the actions, right? So if you keep putting every application through this, you'll see how each of those, can evolve across these three layers.
Yep. So, one thing from the founder's lens, right? So, let's say a founder is starting up right now in sales tech or rev tech space, right? Uh, what are the areas that probably you think would be a best suitable areas to go and actually see if there are spaces there? What do you think? Like, are there any spaces that new founders coming up in rev tech, sales tech space, right, where they can go? Or you think, okay, with Gen AI, it makes perfect sense to actually go in that direction? Because earlier, before it was kind of not possible. As you said, like conversational AI, but is there any other space that you think would also make sense?
Yeah, I would say, in fact, actually, conversation intelligence is a good example on the other side, which is, as a founder today, you don't only have to think about what can I build, you also have to think about what can I build better or faster than the existing players in the space, right?
Hmm.
Unlike other technology revolutions, the challenge with the Gen AI revolution is that it has been one of the easiest and fastest for incumbents to adopt. See, typically the advantage that startups had was saying that, what, by the time IBM decides to do this, I could already build a $10 million business.
Right.
But today, IBM is, taking their whatever $100 billion business and saying, what, I'm going to add this layer. And even if 1% of the people in my customer set adopt it, I am already building a $1 billion business in the first 12 months.
Hmm.
Right. So you as a founder have to apply the additional layer of not just saying why now, which could be answered through, what technology is making it possible, but also why me, right? Which is what can I do better than the incumbent, right? And that's the same thing with like conversation intelligence. Even though I'm saying that, with Gen AI you can do like 25 things within the conversation intelligence umbrella, I wouldn't recommend anybody to go and start a conversation intelligence company today,
Hmm.
because every conversation intelligence player is already adding the Gen AI layer. And unless you can come and tell me that there is a fundamental way in which you're going to rethink the product, right? What can it deliver based on the fact that I can now assume that Gen AI is there and it's going to get better. Right. So I think that's a very important lens to put, and I think oftentimes people miss out on it, and people
Yes.
also don't understand how quickly the incumbents are moving in the space, even where you might not be seeing activity from the outside. And I think if you use that lens, then the way to think about it is, what was the operating assumption for software in the past, right? The operating assumption for the software in the past was that the software was something that was making a human being smarter or better or more efficient, right? Today, if you assume the Gen AI framework, it no longer has to be constrained by that definition of software, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't have to make a human smarter or better or faster. It doesn't have to replace a human either, right?
Hmm.
But there are different ways to slice and dice this to say that I can deliver an outcome to you.
Makes sense. Yep.
And I think that's the lens that startup founders today should use, right?
Hmm.
Like a small example would be that, earlier if I signed the agreement with the customer, right, there were like four other people in the organization that needed to get involved, right? Once I
Hmm.
clicked on that, close one on my Salesforce, I would need to create a contract. I would need legal to do something. I would need to create an invoice. I would need accounts team to do something. Then the accounts receivable team. Now, at the end of the day, this is a dumb process. But each software was only helping that one person do something slightly better,
Hmm.
right? Or in some cases, not even better, but just in a slightly more organized manner, right? Like you just have to upload that damn thing into Salesforce. But today, could I say that as soon as the deal closed one is done, it hands over to an AI agent that makes sure that the money gets paid into the bank account and all the threads get closed, right? So if there are follow-ups that need to happen, whatever else that needs to happen, right? Invoices need to get generated. Can I just put that in the chat interface saying, hey, this is what they agreed to? Or go look at these three calls in which we discuss the terms and generate a contract based on that, right? And generate an invoice based on that. So I think that's kind of where you have to think about, like, it's not replacing a single human being. It's not, replacing a particular tool or making that one tool better. It is delivering an outcome that is part of a business process.
So majorly, like as you said earlier, it was more about efficiency optimization of sort. Now it is more about outcomes with Gen AI. So probably if you are building something, then you should think from the outcome perspective, like where are some of the important outcomes are, and then identify persona and who is actually going to spend time there, which is making more sense for you, and then probably start building from there.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. So, Shruti, this is more sort of a personal rapid fire of sort that we will do, right? So, I'll be asking quick questions, and you have to come up with like quick answers, right? It can be
Okay.
a one
I'm
word.
assuming I can say pass when I want to.
Yeah, I think you can. So, if you don't want to answer, right? And it can be like one statement of sort, right? So, first question is, what's your go-to work playlist genre that you have, or like
But
even you are interested in music or not?
I can't listen to music and operate, but I have a go-to thing that I listen to before I get ready to get into deep work. It's binaural beats. It's like a type of repetitive beats that just are supposed to help your brain focus better.
Okay, very nice. I'll try to search what it is. I don't know actually. So, so you are a night owl or an early bird?
Um, Early bird naturally, but selling to the US, made me a night owl.
I think like whoever the Indian founder they had to become night owl, right? So third question, if you could have dinner with an historical figure, right? Who would be?
Edison.
Why Edison?
Well, I think he is one of those people who failed a lot and made many, many different things. And I think that I would love to talk to him about what kept him going and also how he came up with all those fun ideas.
I would ask him what was your GTM strategy? Cool. What's your favorite app for staying organized if you use anyone?
I've tried to use all sorts of software to get myself organized, but I think everything feels so distracting because at the end of the day, you go and start doing everything else.
No, I think you're right. I've tried Notion, I've tried Notes, Apple Notes, I've tried a lot of note taking softwares, but I think ultimately a notebook works best, and a calendar. One word to describe your leadership style.
People first.
Okay. Uh, a name your team calls you by when you're not around. Wingman, remember, like if when you were in Wingman, like what people were like usually calling you behind your back.
I don't know. I would like to think that they were just calling me Wing Woman, which was kind of my nickname.
One of the best days in Wingman. Uh, a, there are like there you can make it like two days actually. I would like to ask, so before acquisition and after acquisition.
Sure. So I think for us, the day we hit $1 million revenue number, right? Because that just symbolizes so many things, and it's kind of the
Yeah,
first big
yeah.
milestone. I would say the post acquisition, the kind of the post acquisition party with the with Clari team, because
Hmm.
that's kind of when we knew that people can stop being so scared. Because as part of every acquisition, people are so scared, and the teams could really come together. So I think that was very memorable to see everybody there.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Shruti. It was like amazing talking to you. A lot of insights, a lot of actually lessons for me, actually, right? So thank you so much. Would love to do it again, and would love to do it in person if I someday in like Dubai or you are in India. Would love to do this again. Anything that you
Absolutely.
wanna like highlight, or how was the experience of you?
No, I think this was good. I think if there is a lot of the problem as a founder is that there's a lot of advice that flows in. The problem is not the paucity of advice. The problem is two things, right? One is you don't know which advice is right for you, and even if you inherently feel that this advice is right for you, you find it difficult to create the space and time to say, you know what, this is what I'm going to focus on trying to adopt or take forward. So I would say that that's why as a founder, oftentimes less is more.
I think you're right. Every day we get an advice from every. Thank you so much. But this was from your angle. I think this was more of sort of a lesson for me, right? Because there were some things I was able to resonate totally. One thing that stuck through my mind is uh, the VP of sales saying that they want to solve coaching, but actually it was not. So for a founder to actually take and go back and saying no is a big thing actually. I think there you how did you do it at that moment of time? It is a like better decision making model, decision making framework that you have generated, right? I think this is a very good way of operating per se. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Shruti.
Yeah, glad we could finally do this.
Yeah.